Hello, everybody, and welcome to Safety Forward's Lunch and Learn, the aspects of asbestos, understanding the risks and legal obligations that apply to asbestos. So today we're just going to touch and give a quick an overview into what you should do if you discover asbestos, what you have to do to manage it, and who should be removing it and who shouldn't be removing it. Wonderful. So, right, what is asbestos? So asbestos is a naturally occurring fibrous silicate mineral. There's three typical different types, but I believe there are 7 or 9 actual types, but the three most common are white, brown, and blue. So typically, when you're looking for asbestos, where would you find it? You'd usually find it in insulation, fireproofing, roofing tiles, boiler lagging. There's various other places. It's not just simply walls, ceilings, but you'll find them quite often there as well. So, why is asbestos so dangerous? When asbestos fibres are inhaled, they become trapped in your lungs and cause long-term health issues. The diseases develop slowly, and to be honest, quite often they can take 20 to 50 years to appear. So, just to make you aware that inhaling the fibres, we don't even one fibre can cause serious damage. So, we want to make sure that we are not inhaling any asbestos fibres whatsoever. There is no safe level of exposure when it comes to these things. Okay. So the health risks of asbestos, what can they cause? What does it do to us? So it can give us mesothelioma, which is a horrible disease that, it's terminal. There's not much you can do, and it takes 20 to 50 years to appear. You've got asbestosis, lung cancer, pleural thickening. With the most high risk groups of people being exposed to asbestos are going to be in the construction work, shipbuilders, maintenance workers. They're all going to be, anybody that's working in that area that this typically you find a lot of asbestos. Construction is the highest one without a shadow of a doubt. Okay, so where might we find asbestos? So when you're looking at all the lovely new buildings that are around, if they were built after the year 2000, the chances of there being asbestos in there are slim to none. It was banned unless it was built illegally or unless it was put in there, not following legislation. Buildings built in 2000 or after should not contain asbestos. When you're working with older buildings, between the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you typically want to, like I said, if you find asbestos, you're typically going to find it pipe lagging, ceiling tiles, floor tiles, cement products, sprayed coatings, all these different things, boiler lagging. It's in so many different places. So this is typically where you would find asbestos if you're working in construction, typically, or if it can be in commercial premises as well. So the legislation overview, the regulation, the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012, that is typically the main regulation that covers asbestos. The regulation aims to protect workers and prevent exposure to asbestos, whilst also ensuring proper handling and awareness. So we always say awareness. Everybody should really have awareness. If they could potentially work with asbestos, we would recommend awareness training for everybody that could potentially work with it. It doesn't mean they can remove it. It doesn't mean that they can touch it. It just means they can identify it, and it can let them take the proper steps to ensure that it's adequately controlled. Okay, so the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012 require employees to identify and assess any risks associated with the asbestos, maintain an asbestos register and management plan, provide suitable training. Like you said, it depends at what level you're working with asbestos, the training. So if you're working at, a level where you just want to be able to identify it and not handle it, you need awareness. If we're dealing with very low risk asbestos that's not very friable, which means it doesn't break off into small particles so much, then you can have non-licensed removal. But if you're looking at anything that's even moderately considered slightly a risk, a higher risk, you want to have a fully licensed asbestos removal company. If you cannot decide whether the asbestos is considered low risk, high risk, it's not just get a professional in. We don't want to make that decision ourselves because it could have absolutely catastrophic consequences. And so in the UK, the main legislation covering asbestos is the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012. And this should be where we refer to if we need support on it. So, other relevant UK acts that actually cover asbestos are the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. Typically covers anything health and safety as a blanket. It's pretty much the overruling health and safety law. Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999. These also provide framework for managing health and safety in the workplace, including asbestos risk. And CDM 2015, Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015. So typically it would be those four legislation that would tend to cover asbestos as a whole. Okay, so your employer responsibilities. So the employer's responsibility, you as an employer, is it your responsibility to conduct risk assessments, to provide PPE and training, inform and consult employees of anything and knowledge of the whereabouts of asbestos, the hazard of it, where it is, everything like that should be given to employees required to work in the environment, and to establish a proper emergency procedure. We can manage the asbestos, but accidents may happen. And if the asbestos can be damaged, we need to ensure we've got a suitable procedure in place to make sure that we can manage this situation and ensure everybody walks away from it without having inhaled any of the asbestos fibres. Workers' responsibilities. So it's the worker's responsibility to follow procedures and training, to wear PPE properly, and so, to wear the PPE provided, which should always be provided free of charge, and to report suspected asbestos-containing materials or damage to suspected asbestos-containing materials. So we always want to make sure that if it's found, we need to report it. If it's not reported, you could be putting anybody else in that working environment's health at risk. Wearing PPE properly, any mask, if we are removing asbestos, any masks, you've got to be face fit tested. It's got to be suitably a minimum a half face mask. I believe a lot of them require overhead full hoods in asbestos. No, yes, it's overhead full hoods are required. So we have to just make sure that we're wearing the correct PPE and RPE, so personal protective equipment and respiratory protective equipment. Asbestos survey types. There are two different types of asbestos survey. One would be a management survey in a routine occupancy. So that would be typically a management survey done on a commercial premises where they'll take samples and, if they find asbestos, they'll give you a risk level to it and how it needs to be managed, and they'll come with a management plan. This then needs to be reviewed on an annual basis. The management plan does, with a new survey recommended every 3 to 5 yearly, I believe. And then the second type that we've got is a refurbishment/demolition survey, which is before any major demolition works or any major renovations, just to ensure that we haven't got any asbestos hidden anywhere, and we're not exposing the construction workers to any existing asbestos in the building. So, what should we do if we find asbestos? So, if we find asbestos, we shouldn't be touching it or disturbing it. It's not an employee's responsibility to remove it or anything like this. It's just if you identify it, you should be trained in awareness to be able to identify the asbestos, and then you need to notify your supervisor. The supervisor is then responsible for managing the situation, and they will contact a licensed contractor for removal if it being high risk. Typically, if we're not sure, we'll just go for the contact the licensed contractor for it. It's the safest bet, and we can't put people at risk here over whether we need a contracted licensed a licensed contractor or a non-licensed contractor. If we can't assess it, we should just be getting the licensed in. It's just the way to do it without any risk of sending people in who are not properly trained to remove it. So, asbestos removal and licensing. So, when we're removing the high-risk asbestos, it must be a licensed professional required to do it. They have to be licensed by the HSE. So, the HSE must be notified, and any post-removal procedures must be followed. So that would be post-removal air testing to ensure that there are no asbestos fibres left in the air after we've removed it all, and to ensure that all of our controls that we put in place were suitable to manage the asbestos. Okay, so training requirements. So typically, you would like for maintenance workers, electricians, and plumbers, you need minimum awareness really for the three different types: awareness, non-licensed work, and licensed work. With your guys, you don't particularly want them if they are working on a construction site. We don't want them removing the asbestos themselves typically. So we would tend to want them to have awareness to report it to a supervisor who would then manage getting the correct licensed workers in. So it is mandatory for maintenance workers, electricians and plumbers. We are legally required to provide them with it, as the risk in what they do of them encountering asbestos is quite considerable. So just to touch on it again, three different types of work. Awareness, that's for identifying the asbestos. Non-licenses is for removing low-risk asbestos with specific measures in place. It's not quite as simple as they can just go in and remove it because they think it's low risk. There are specific measures that must be taken. And licensed work, where you have to be licensed by the HSE to remove it and send your full report over to the HSE. So penalties for non-compliance with asbestos can result in fines and prosecution. It can result in serious reputational damage to your business, which in turn can loss of work in the future. It may result in a bad image for you, which makes companies not want to work with you, not want to work with the company. So these are the things we need to think of. It's not just a direct. We look at what we call the iceberg, which are the costs that you can calculate and you can foresee above. But then you've got the underlying costs, which are, things such as insurance premiums going up, all these different things, loss of work, loss of earnings, and, even legal cases against you. All of these things are all costs that we can't really put a number on straight off the bat until the investigation's been done. So these are all things that can add up, and they can be further penalties without being a direct fine or prosecution. So, best practices for managing asbestos. So, we should always be keeping asbestos containing materials in good condition. We should be labelling and maintaining records of asbestos. So, if asbestos is present, we need appropriate signage in place. We need to ensure, that everybody's aware that it is there. And we need to look at the area it's in. If is it in an area where there is a high volume of vehicle movement, of forklift truck movement. In these situations, typically, a lot of the time, it would probably be better to just actually remove it. Even if it might not be such a high risk, but if a forklift truck could hit it, that's going to change everything. So these are the kind of things that we have to factor in when we're thinking about, when we're risk assessing the situation. What's the environment like? What could cause damage to the asbestos, and how can I manage that? Can I put up barriers in place to prevent vehicles from being able to hit it or access it? Stuff like that are what we want to be doing. So, like I said, any asbestos needs to be labelled. If asbestos is found in your premises, we want to typically look for a management plan to ensure that we are doing everything practicable to make sure that it remains in a safe condition and doesn't be damaged. Regular inspections, really important. Once again, regular inspections are, and purely on the principle that if somebody damages it and it's not reported, this could be a major problem. So we need to regularly inspect any asbestos within our premises. And yes, like I said, all employees need to be made aware. And used accredited labs and contractors. So we always want to use proper, accredited contractors, so we know they are competent in what they're doing, and it just takes any risk of us using incompetent persons or not properly qualified persons to remove that asbestos. So there have been quite a few times that I have actually encountered asbestos. One time I have been working with somebody, and I told them that their asbestos wall was not signed. And so I went away, and I came back and did another visit after saying we need to put an appropriate sign up and everything. Perhaps I wasn't clear enough with my instructions, as this person had then actually drilled their danger asbestos sign into the asbestos. Which that actually created us a major amount of problems, which then led to the asbestos being removed. What you hear quite a lot from people as well is I heard this recently from one of my clients, that there was a building across the road from them. They have one piece of asbestos, this client does, in their premises. It's literally a shelf in an office, and they were talking to me. They'd had all the other asbestos removed. It was considered so low risk they didn't remove it. However, down the line, it slightly started to deteriorate, and there's been looking at removing it, and it's looking like it's going to cost quite a lot to remove this shelf. And across the road from him, there was an old business there sitting there that had been there for, I think it had been there for 50, 60 years, and the whole building disappeared in a couple of days. And he said, how did they manage to get all that done with the asbestos, with properly removed with asbestos, with proper licensed people? The answer was that they didn't. They actually just had people remove it that shouldn't have been removing it. However, I don't think these people actually realise that down the line, they could be really putting themselves at risk of serious illness, and it could even prove terminal in the end. And all that just for saving a little bit of money. All that just making a little bit of money, undercutting some of the larger companies by doing it technically not licensed, but not reporting the asbestos. This isn't okay. At the end of the day now, we've got a dilemma there, because how can you prove that you've got ill from this business when you've been removing asbestos you shouldn't have been removing? It's a job that's not been done on the books. So these are the kind of things we always say: use accredited labs and contractors, so you can trust the removal process, you can trust their procedures, and you can trust the results that they give you from the labs when they do test your ACMs. I'd just like to take this time now to say thank you all very much for attending. Thank you for your time and your engagement. It's really appreciated. And like I said, if there's anything that you want to hear about in the future, any suggestions, please just drop us an email, scan the QR code, leave a review, or if you don't want to do that, send us an email. We're always available to discuss what you need.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay, thank you very much, guys.